Hi everybody, welcome back to Operant Conditioning Part 2. We're in the middle of the Unit 4 learning, and today I'm going to finish up the different variations on the schedules that go along with operant conditioning. Make sure you have your felt tip pens, make sure you have somewhere comfortable to take notes, and don't forget those ever important binder notes on Unit 4, Video 4, Operant Conditioning Part 2. Your binder notes will be page 11 and 12. I'll see you on the other side. Okay, welcome back everyone. So I want to bring you back to where we left off in the other video, which for operant conditioning was we just started to talk about positive and negative punishments and positive and negative reinforcements. Okay, so there are 4 types: positive reinforcement, positive punishment, negative reinforcement, negative punishment. Okay, the one key principle here is you need to make sure you understand that positive does not mean good or bad. Negative does not mean good or bad. Positive and negative are seen in these situations as a mathematical symbol. So you're either giving something, when you're adding something, you call it positive. So a positive reinforcement or a positive punishment. When you're taking something away, it's a negative reinforcement or a negative punishment. But the giving or the taking away is not good or bad. It has nothing to do with good or bad. It just means you're adding something into the scenario or taking something away if it's negative. Right? Positive is adding something in, negative is taking something out, whether it's reinforcements or punishments. Okay, so with that, let's get started. So positive reinforcement is always going to increase a behavior, but positive reinforcement is going to increase the behavior by adding something into the scenario. In this case, it's something good. Okay, so what would we add in order to get a desired behavior? $5, we said, for each A on a report card. Or maybe you set up a system of giving a lollipop every time a kid goes to the potty by him or herself. Or if you're training a new puppy, maybe you give a little pellet of food every time that the dog follows a command. So when it comes to teenagers, maybe for A's on a report card, you give the kid the car keys for the weekend, right? The driving privileges. When you're working for a living, you do a good job, you get a bonus from your boss for working extra hard. Right? So for every age group, there's a positive reinforcement that's usually set into place within the schedule of payment. Okay, so positive doesn't necessarily mean good or bad. It's just a way of reinforcing the good or bad behavior. Right? It's about the reinforcement. It's not about positive or negative being good or bad. Whatever you think or agree with or disagree with in terms of a punishment or a reward is irrelevant. You add a stimulus for positive reinforcement. You add a pleasant stimulus to increase or maintain positive behavior. Okay, so a negative reinforcement is still increasing the desired behavior. You still want to increase the good stuff, right? So by increasing the behavior, because it's reinforcement, you're adding to the reinforcement. However, with negative reinforcement, you're taking something away in order to strengthen the reinforcement. Okay, so it gets a little tricky. You're subtracting something. So if that same kid that you gave $1 to for every time he or she made the bed stopped doing their chores, what could you do instead of giving the positive reinforcement of $1 every time? You could say, take away his or her TV or electronics or cell phone for a couple of days. right? You didn't follow the rules, and now we're taking something away. That's a negative reinforcement. Or perhaps another example could be you're taking away an aversive stimulus, so an ache or a pain, right? An ache or a pain, you take away the headache by adding aspirin, right? You're adding something to the equation, but you're taking, so the aspirin taking, the medicine taking, the listening to the doctor and taking your medicine behavior is a good thing. And you're getting back a 0 headache. Okay, so every time we take an aspirin in the future, we're going to remember that it took away that headache. So when we get a headache or a body ache later on, we're going to remember that medicine taking behavior paid off as soon as we took an Advil or an aspirin. So the medicine taking is the behavior, and the getting rid of the headache is the aversive stimulus. Okay? Calling out from school when you fake your sickness or illness, right? You're avoiding the aversive thing, the big ugly bad wolf called school, right? The aversive thing is the school going. But we increase the faking of the illness behavior through negative enforcement by taking away or subtracting the aversive scenario, which is the school going. Okay? We don't want to go to school. So we increase our not going to school. We reinforce not going to school by faking an illness. How about raining? Using an umbrella, right? So the using of an umbrella usage is good behavior. It's tidy behavior. You think ahead. You have that umbrella with you and it starts pouring out. You're taking away the aversive stimuli, right, of getting soaking wet from the downpour. And you're doing that by adding in the umbrella. So all three of these examples are scenarios that are negative reinforcement, or reinforcers that happen to be negative, in that they are reinforcing the taking away of either the wetness or being rained upon that occurs in that particular scenario, or the other behaviors. Your mom wants you to clean your room more often. She wants to increase or reinforce the cleaning up behavior. So she plans to negatively reinforce you in order to get you to do that. So once you clean your room, once you finally cleaned your room, she says, "Great job," and then says, "Now we're going to take away your driving privileges. Give me your car keys so that you'll have more time to clean. You did such a great job cleaning your room. We want you to spend every waking moment cleaning because you're so good at it." But does that meet the criteria of the schedule? Right? Is that increasing the desired behavior? Would that ever make you want to clean your room again? No, that's ridiculous. And that's why it's not a reinforcement, neither positive or negative. Right? You can't do the backwards thing and make no logic or make no sense and expect that the organism or the subject or the kid is going to follow along with you. It has to make sense. Okay, so you can either take something away or add a punishment, or the punishment can be the taking away of something, but you can't reward somebody's good deeds and good behavior with more work. That's not cool. It's mean. So while you might want to take away the chores, a negative reinforcement is also when new behaviors remove negative consequences. If you want to stop an aversive stimuli, for example, a nagging mom about never cleaning up your room, you would clean the room to stop the aversive stimuli of a nagging mother. Okay? Or you would stop the aversive stimuli of getting a sunburn by using sunscreen and a hat. Or another example would be you would stop the aversive stimuli of nail biting by using a chemical on your nails. And finally, you would stop anxiety, the aversive stimuli of anxiousness, by perhaps smoking a cigarette or having a glass of wine, which I'm not telling you to do by any means. It's bad. It's bad behavior, but that's not the point with operant conditioning. Throw that out the window. With operant conditioning, it's all about reinforcing the good behavior or the bad behavior or the aversive stimuli. Okay? I want you to skip part of your notes for a minute and go to the next page of your notes on the very bottom. Okay, we're going to come back to the stuff on the top in a little bit. For some of you, we went over this in class already. So positive and negative punishment, the bottom of page 12. So when I used to coach cheerleaders, I used to give out punishments if kids were late or if they were chewing gum or doing all the things that they weren't supposed to be doing, talking during practice, etc. And punishments were ways of conditioning your body to make it healthier and stronger. So they would run an extra mile or lap, they would hold a plank an extra 5 minutes, they would do an extra 50 crunches, whatever it was that I felt was desirable to take away the fact that they were late to practice or doing something wrong during, okay? When it comes to punishments, it sounds bad, but we're actually adding something sometimes to decrease the bad or aversive behavior, right? So the punishment is sometimes positive, right? In this case, it conditions your body to make it stronger. Even though it feels like pain, because you have to do it and get through it, it's a positive reinforcement, even though we call it punishments. I want you to keep that in mind as I go over these different schedules, okay? So in the case of psychology and conditioning, operant conditioning, punishment decreases behavior. So it's either stopping the behavior or decreasing it. And the same thing with positive and negative. When it comes to punishments, we're either adding something to or we're taking something away. So for positive punishment, we're adding in or we are decreasing a response or a behavior by adding an adverse stimuli or a bad stimuli. So what would we add in order to decrease somebody's behavior? Well, with a toddler, you could maybe add in a spanking if a kid throws a temper tantrum, right? So you're adding in a spanking in order to take away the aversive temper tantrum. Or in a less scary scenario, we could say add in a speeding ticket in order to reduce the speeding behavior of a fast driver. And the last example is adding soap to the mouth of a foul-mouthed child. So you add soap to take away the aversive stimuli of cursing. Okay, so positive punishment is getting the aversive or unwanted behavior to decrease. The goal is getting the behavior to stop, or at least to make it happen less often. Okay, the last one is negative punishment. Okay, negative punishment is a decrease in the response by removing a positive stimulus. This is also called omission training, okay? Write that down. You could take away somebody's keys or their driver's license if they keep doing the wrong thing as a new driver, right? If they keep speeding. That's a good way to get a speeder off the road. You could also take away another privilege, say the hours that they're allowed to. You can ground somebody and say you're going to stay in your room and I'm going to take away your electronics, your cell phone and your laptop and your gaming console. That's the idea of a negative punishment. So your dad wants you to stop yelling at your sister, your little baby sister. So the sister yelling is the behavior, the aversive behavior. So you are yelling at your sister again, and I want you to stop that behavior. So what I'm going to do now to stop that behavior is I'm going to give you an extra $50 for your allowances. Is that going to curb you yelling at your sister? No. You have to take something that means something to the kid away, or add something that they don't like in order to punish a student or a child or a kid, right? So if a student acts up and you say, here's a lollipop every time I catch you doing that bad thing, is that going to stop the behavior? Of course not. What could stop the behavior is adding in a referral or a detention or a suspension, right? Or a phone call home. So adding in a punishment to elicit a stopping of the behavior. So there are some justifications for occasional punishments, but usually punishments lead to negative effects. Punishments can result in unwanted fear of people that you're supposed to trust. It can confuse the organism or the child or the pet or the seal. It also might feel like you're justifying the ability to inflict pain upon others, and that's not good. If the punishment doesn't ever actually happen or mean anything, though, then that aggression you feel towards, say, an agent or a dean justifies bad behavior. It becomes persistent in the absence of actual punishments, right? You lose respect for everything that comes out of his or her mouth if they don't follow through. Okay, so it's usually, they might not do that thing they promised you they wouldn't do anymore, but they go and do something worse, right? They're flipping all over the place, different types of reinforcement schedules. So we can reinforce in different time frames. So the first one is called continuous reinforcement. This is the easiest one to understand because continuous means all of the time. So continuous reinforcement is reinforcing a behavior every single time that it happens. Continuous reinforcement. So this happens with the initial stages of learning or training either animals or children. Say you're potty training a little kid to go on the toilet, right? They're going to need a lolly or a binky or a hug, something, every time they get it right in order to keep doing it, right? You want them to keep going on the potty, not in their diaper, so you keep rewarding them many, many times. At some point, you don't need to reward them anymore because the doing of the behavior in a good way feels good to the person. And just doing the right thing and being a good citizen or family member is enough. Okay, but during the training stages, you must constantly and steadily reinforce the behavior you're looking to teach. So let's break down these other types that we have. Ratio is the number of times. So the reinforcement happens after a specific number of times. The behavior is performed this many times a day. Okay, so for sports, I might say, today we're going to do 50 crunches in the first 15 minutes. You're going to hold the plank 4 times for 5 minutes apiece, and then you're going to do some running and conditioning of your aerobic activity by sprinting, 30 times for 100 yards. Okay. A partial reinforcement is usually the resistance to the extinction is greater, so you're not necessarily going to stop doing the behavior because you're not sure when you're going to get that reinforcement, right? So a partial reinforcement, we need to break this one down because it's different. There are different types, okay? We have fixed ratio, which is the number of times you do something or the same number of times you get reinforced. It's fixed, it's set. So I work 80 hours, I get paid $2,000 for 80 hours every 2 weeks. I make my bed every day if I'm 5 years old, and I get $1 every time I make my bed correctly. That's a fixed ratio. A fixed ratio is going to be reinforcing a response. After a specified number of responses, you get a reward. So you use those reward cards at a store, right? Those punch cards. You buy 10 coffees, you get one free. So there's a specific number that needs to happen. You need to buy 10 of them in order to get the free one. That's a fixed ratio. A variable ratio is reinforcing the response at an unpredicted amount of time. So gambling or slot machines is a good example of this. You don't know how many times you're going to have to push the button or pull the lever on the slot machine in order to win, right? It's random. You never know when the payoff is coming. They keep you there. They keep you putting in dollars or $5 because they give you little wins, little increments of reinforcement. Little increments of reinforcing the behavior of pulling the lever, right? Put a coin in, pull the lever. The machine is going to pay you something small every 4 or 5 pulls. The reason that it varies is because you don't know when you're getting the payoff. So the interval is going to be reinforcing a response after an unpredicted amount of time. When you're fishing, for example, you don't know how many times that you're going to put that pole or that hook into the water until you get a fish. It's unpredictable. You don't know if you're a stargazer looking into the sky with a telescope when you're going to see a shooting star. But if you invest enough time throwing that fishing line in or staring at the telescope, eventually you're going to get the thing you're looking for, the reinforcement. Eventually a fish will hook and eventually a star will shoot. But it's unpredictable. It's like a slot machine. Okay? So for reinforcement, it lasts less with variable ratio. Reinforcement is going to be the amount of time that is passed, and then the fixed interval is the fixed amount of time that is passed. Okay, so an example of this would be the pigeons playing ping pong, right? So all of them kind of overlap each other and are somewhat similar. So there are 4 types of partial reinforcement, with a variation of fixed schedules and variable schedules, and then ratio schedules and interval schedules. So to be clear, if something is fixed, it means set, right? Fixed versus variable, right? Variable means it varies. Fixed means it's set in stone. Okay, write that down like in the margin of your notes somewhere on page 12. With fixed, you know when the reinforcement is coming. With variable, you don't know when the reinforcement is going to come because it's, well, a variable. It's varying, hence variable. So again, with variable, there's no set schedule. So I'm going to show you the 4 different types, and then we're going to go over some examples for each, which will make everything seem a lot clearer. The first type we're going to go over is called fixed. So the number of behaviors or the length of time intervals are constant. So every time it's the same. The variables, meaning the number of behaviors and the length of time within the intervals, stay the same every single time. So it's simply fixed versus variable. Okay, with fixed, you know when the reinforcement is coming. With variable, it varies. You don't know when the reinforcement is going to come because it's unpredictable. It's varying. Ratio is when you are discussing the number of responses that happen each time within a given schedule. So it's simply a count of the responses given. Okay, the behaviors or responses from those behaviors. Interval is just another way of saying that something is based on a time frame, often occurring within a set schedule. So let's talk about each of them. Okay, each of these ratio schedules. Fixed ratio would be when your reinforcement is followed by a response every single time. Okay, so piecework, for example, in a factory, in manufacturing, say, denim jeans, okay? You work there, and for like every 50 zippers that you sew into a pair of jeans and put together, you get $50, okay? So you don't get $1 each time you sew a zipper in, even though it's $1 a zipper. You get 50 done, you get $50, okay? When you have this kind of a fixed ratio schedule, the results in manufacturing is a high production rate. The workers tend to work super hard and they take few breaks. It can, however, lead to burnout. And often when people are tired and working too hard and get burned out, the quality of the work goes down. This happens in video games, right? You might play a video game and collect certain tokens or objects or points in order to receive some type of reward. This also can happen in a sales commission job. A worker might earn $100 for every third vacuum that they sell. Okay? A child might get a reward if they earn 5 A's on their homework assignments. For every 5th A, a parent might reward the child with a new toy. Okay, so piecework is any factory type work where you need to do X amount of things for X amount of dollars. Okay, so for every 100 envelopes that you stuff or every 100 flyers that you stick on a windshield, you might get $10. If you work in a farm, for every basket of fruit that you pick, you might get $2. Okay, in the service industry, this looks like for every 10 mani and pedis that you buy, right, you might get 1 manicure pedicure for free. And finally, in a fixed ratio situation in commerce, right, say buying $1,000 worth of goods on Amazon.com or Etsy, you might get 20 cents off for every gallon of gas that you buy at your favorite gas station. So to be clear, if something is a fixed ratio, it is set in stone. It's fixed versus varying. And therefore, you know if you do X, your payment, Y, is coming predictably. So the number of responses that you give or genes that you make, you get a predictable amount of money. Okay, so that was fixed ratio. Variable ratio is a varying amount on the number of responses. So it reinforces you, right? The response after an unpredictable number of responses, you finally get a payoff. This produces more responding than any other method because it's the hardest to extinguish since it has an unpredictable factor. The unpredictability keeps you going. A really good example of this are slot machines or gambling in general, right? It's a variable ratio, meaning the number of times that you gamble X amount of dollars, you don't know when you are going to get reinforced with a payout. And hopefully, when you do finally win, it will be a big one. Because in slot machines, players have no way of knowing how many times they're going to have to pull that lever in order to get their money back, let alone win. All they know is that eventually they will win something. But it's unpredictable. This is why slot machines are so effective. Players are reluctant to quit because they think the next one is going to be the big one. It's always a possibility that that next 5-cent coin will pay out $1 million. Okay? So you're varying the number of times trying based on how much money you have to spend. Okay? In sales at a call center, workers never know how many calls they might need to make in order to receive that bonus. They just know that if they do a lot of phone calling, eventually it's going to pay off, right? The salesperson might travel from house to house to house, but he never knows when he's going to get an interested buyer, right? It could be the next house, or it could be the 50th house that finally buys a vacuum. In some games, players collect little tokens or items in order to receive a reward or to go up to the next level. They don't know how many tokens they actually need to get there. They just know they need to keep playing in order to get those tokens to keep going up. These schedules are the most resistant to extinction because of the unpredictability. Variable ratio is the most resistant to extinction because of its unpredictability. So there's slot machine, or playing poker, or playing cards, or craps, anything like that, even roulette, right? The reinforcement, you never know when it's gonna pay when you're gambling. Now, on the other side of the spectrum is interval schedules. Interval schedules are based on time. It's the amount of time that you spend responding. So for number 3, fixed interval. Fixed interval means it's a fixed amount of time and it reinforces a response only after a specified or fixed amount of time has lapsed. So studying, for example, for an exam, waiting to study for a test that's is going to happen on Friday, right? Because your teacher gives you a test every Friday. It doesn't matter, does it, if you study Monday for 20 minutes, Tuesday for 20 minutes, Wednesday for 20 minutes, and Thursday for 20 minutes, right? You can do that, or you can study for 2 hours on Thursday and still get the same reward, the same grade, right? Because the varying thing is the amount of studying you do. The predictable thing is that you know when it's going to happen. It's going to happen on Friday. Okay? So how often or when you do the studying varies in order to get the same result. Okay, so this is always posed against fixed interval. There's a fixed amount of time, so studying at any point, Monday through Thursday, because you know the Friday is the test. So if I know today is Monday, and on Friday I'm going to be having a test, I'm going to be reinforced after I pass the test and make some dollars for mom and dad if I do a good job. It's not the amount of time that I spend studying or the number of times that I study, it's the fact that I study, right? So the opposite of that is variable interval. Like, you don't know when the quiz or the test is coming, but as a disciplined student, you keep studying anyway. Because you know at some point you're going to have a test. And for example, on last Friday, I gave a pop quiz. You had no idea that it was coming. If you did your homework assignment and you were in class to go over those 20 scenarios, then it didn't matter that it was a pop test. You were ready. You invested your time and you got the payoff of getting everything correct. So that type is called variable interval. The amount of time that you study varies and the payoff varies. You don't know when you're going to get the test. Another example is getting paid every 2 weeks, right? So you're working full-time, 80 hours over 2 weeks. That's time putting in, right? You're going to get paid at the end with a fixed rate. So a fixed rate for a fixed number of hours. So the variable intervals are also about time. It's just that the time varies, so it's unpredictable. So with studying schedules, if a student knows that there's going to be an exam every Friday, blah, blah, blah. With allowance, if a child knows that he or she gets allowance on Sunday, as long as her bedroom is clean, she probably won't keep it clean the other 6 days of the week. Saturday night, she's going to make sure she cleans it up because the response rate is fairly predictable. But it increases as the reinforcement time gets closer. And then it drops off precipitously immediately after that reinforcement. The room gets messy again. Let's look at a response rate that is fairly predictable in a lab setting. Okay? So a fixed interval schedule in a lab setting with a rat and a lever and pellets of food. Imagine that you're training the rat to press the lever. okay? But you only reinforce the first response every 10 minutes. Okay, so the rat is going to keep pressing the lever until that 10-minute mark, and finally it pays off. It doesn't know when you're going to give it a treat, but it knows that there's a span of time between the last time that he got one. So he doesn't do much trying right after he gets the reward. And you know that you set it up that every 10 minutes, that first second of that 10-minute mark, you're going to give another piece of treat or food. Right? So at minute 5 is when the rat starts really amping it up and starts tapping the lever again. Right? Halfway through the time of waiting has occurred. Fixed interval schedules in the real world would be a paycheck, right? A fixed interval schedule in the real world would be an interval of 2 weeks. The employee receives reinforcement every 14 days or every 7 days, which may result in a higher response rate as payday approaches. Right? Dental exams are a really good example of a fixed interval schedule. People who go in for their regular 6-month checkups and cleanings often take a lot of extra care to clean their teeth the week leading up to the exam. They might not be so as diligent during the other 5 months as they are that week leading up. And why? They might not be as diligent on a day-to-day basis during those other 5 months prior to the exam. And right after the dental exam, and you get your little sticker or a good job from the dentist and your free toothbrush and your free toothpaste, you start to fall off again the minute you walk out of the dentist's office. You say to yourself, I'm going to be really good this 6 months. I had a lot of tartar or plaque, right? I don't want that to happen again. But in all honesty, you start flossing and brushing only 5 months later. You just do a quick 2-minute brush every morning, every night, no floss, and you end up with a bad report from the dentist or cavities. Okay? The fourth type, the final type, is variable interval. Okay, so it's variable timing and it's variable reinforcements. So the final form is called partial reinforcement. Skinner described the schedule involving delivering. Okay, so variable interval is the last type of schedule. The final form of partial reinforcements that Skinner described in order to train an animal, a child, or an organism. The schedule involves delivering reinforcements after a variable amount of time has elapsed. This also tends to lead to fast response rates and a very slow extinction rate. Schedule refers to the rate of reinforcement delivery, or how frequently the reinforcement is given. Variable indicates the timing is not constant and may vary from one trial to the next. And finally, interval means that the delivery is controlled by time. So variable interval means the schedule is going to be a reinforcement that is delivered at varying and unpredictable intervals of time. In a lab setting, imagine that you are training a pigeon to peck at a key to receive a food pellet. You put the bird on a variable interval schedule 30 times. That means the pigeon will receive reinforcement on an average of every 30 seconds, 1 peck per second. It's important to note that this is an average, however. Sometimes the pigeon might be reinforced after 10 seconds. Sometimes it might have to wait 45 seconds. The key is that the timing is unpredictable. This is very resistant to extinction. The rate of response is moderate, and steady. Very minimal pause after the reinforcement is given. Some examples of variable interval is not knowing when you're getting a quiz, not having any sense of the time period of when you get your next quiz. It's called a pop quiz for a reason, right? This type of pop quiz is not fixed. It's varying. It can pop up at any moment. You don't know when it's coming. So your psychology teacher, Miss Baines, me, gave a pop quiz on Friday. So you, in order to deal with pop quizzes, AP students have to be sort of disciplined, self-disciplined students all the time to know that that could happen at any given point. Would that kind of a schedule, studying schedule, work with, say, special needs kids who have all sorts of behavioral deficiencies and all sorts of learning disabilities? Giving pop quizzes in a scenario like that is just mean and cruel, right? The types of students that perform well with pop quizzes are ones that already have good habits. The schedule is fairly successful with higher achieving students and college students because you never know when you might receive a pop quiz. You're probably going to pay attention to everything your professors say. If you're caught up in your studies for the most part and somewhat prepared for each class, it requires some self-checking, some self-discipline. Okay? Another real-world example of this type of schedule would be checking your email, right? How many times a day do you check your email? Typically, you should be checking your email at random times throughout the day. Instead of checking it every single time you get a notification of a ding. The thing about email is that in most cases, you never know when you're going to receive a message. And because of this, emails roll in sporadically at completely unpredictable times, including, right, the middle of the night, right? From people who are over in California or Europe sending emails for different time zones. Or your psychology teacher, me, being up in the middle of the night editing a video and posting it so that it's there for you in the morning. Final example for this type of scheduling would be in a work environment, right? Employer checking in on your work. So when your boss drops by your office a few times throughout the day to check on your progress, it incentivizes you to have him say back to you, good job, that you're always prepared and doing what you're supposed to be doing, right? They say always try to get caught working, right? Checking in at unpredictable times helps to reinforce good behavior and work habits. Chances are good that you'll work at a fairly steady pace throughout the day since you're never quite sure when your boss is going to pop in. You want to appear busy and productive when she or he happens to stop by, right? In teaching, we have our principals and our assistant principals that do observations throughout the school year in order to make sure that we're doing a good job teaching you guys. Right? If my boss told me when she was coming in, I would have the opportunity to make a perfect lesson. Right? She doesn't want to see that. I want to see that every day is pretty good. Right? Nobody's perfect. Right? On the other hand, if your boss walks in and I have my legs up, my feet up on the table reading a newspaper when I'm supposed to be teaching, I'm going to get in some kind of trouble. Right? So it's very effective having pop-ins, drop-ins, and observational reports when you're employed. It's a very effective way of keeping people working and keeping people honest. Okay? So that's really all I have for the 4 different types of schedules. Okay? Make sure you know them because you are going to have a quiz. I'm not sure what day, but I will tell you the exact day when I have finished writing it. Okay? Right now, I want you to take a look at this last graphic on the screen that you see. The different colors mean something with each of these 4 types. Make sure you understand the difference here, okay? There's going to be a quiz on this very soon, and it may be an interval variable quiz. Just kidding. You will know when it happens. It will be fixed time. It will not be a variable or intermittent timing, okay? So, let's take a look at, we talk about, this chart here shows you what I was kind of talking about earlier before, about each of these different schedules being either resistant or not resistant to extinction, and how quickly we learn to respond to them. Okay, so this blue line over here towards the far left, that's the fixed ratio amount, right? You know, in their response or their reinforcement always is going to be the same, right? For every time you respond, you get a reinforcement. So the number of responses given is something you learn very quickly, but you notice over time that it eventually drops off. You learn very quickly, but notice how over time it will eventually drop off, right? The reward no longer matters. It's not as resistant to extinction is what this chart is saying. Variable ratio is also good when you first start learning a new task or skill. You're conditioned to get a reward after each response. So you learn very quickly. That's what those little black tick marks. It'll eventually drop off, to do that response very quickly. The little black tick marks there are fixed interval and variable interval. Well, with fixed interval, it's a rapid responding near the time for reinforcement. So notice that there's lacks in the reinforcement once, because the object or the subject knows when the reinforcements are coming. So it's like, oh, I have to do like 3 more times this thing. I have to do this thing 3 more times for 3 more hours, and then I'm going to get then I'm going to get my reinforcement, my pay, right? Whereas with variable interval, there's a very steady responding, because you just don't know when you're going to get the reinforcement that is coming, but you know it's coming. Therefore, you're more likely to respond. All right, so that's all I have for you. Make sure that you pause, rewind, go over and over and over this. This is super important. There's going to be 20 scenarios attached in your homework. After you watch this, hopefully you'll be able to get 100 on the homework, and we will go over it as soon as I see you tomorrow. Have a good night. So long.